Hi there, I'm Janine Upton, and today I'll be talking you through some of the basic concepts of a qualitative analysis. As an aside, and just before I leap into bed with some qualitative analysis, it's important to note that neither quantitative nor qualitative research is better than the other. Each has its own strengths and invariably its own weaknesses, and you will choose your method that will best yield data most suited to answering your research questions. Previously, I ran through some concepts and requirements for quantitative analysis, which involved a statistical analysis of numbers. As you know, qualitative analysis does not involve the use of numbers, but rather tends to focus on words, feelings, verbal and non-verbal behavior, and so forth. It also includes the analysis of pictures. So as you can see, the use of statistical analysis is irrelevant. But then you have to ask, how then do we analyze words? Well, there are numerous types of qualitative analysis methods available to you. Your decision on which one is relevant depends on your research questions and the nature of your inquiry. Unlike quantitative analysis, qualitative methods tend to be more inductive. Again, what does this mean? Instead of testing theories, we first start with observations, and from those observations, we develop theories. So it's a little bit more of a bottom-up approach than a quantitative top-down one. This means that the manner in which we deal with theory will change. Unlike quantitative analytic techniques, we won't be testing an existing theory. Rather, these existing theories are used to provide a good understanding of the field and the study. The intent then is to gain insider perspectives on the topic at hand, to gain new insight, and obtain in-depth descriptions of events, understandings, meanings, perspectives, and so forth. From these accounts, we very often find that theories emerge. Qualitative data analysis also differs from quantitative research in that it begins when data collection begins. In addition, it's iterative in that you go backwards and forwards, then you go back, and then you go back some more, and then you update your coding, and then you recode, and so forth. It's also reflexive in that you're required to reflect and think about pretty much what you're thinking about. So basically, this is known as progressive focusing, which means that as a researcher is exposed to more data, they tend to hone in and refine or refocus the emergent findings. The assumption here is that knowledge essentially is contextual. It's socially embedded and constructed and cannot be divorced from context. This means that data collection will involve interaction with actors in a fluid, unstructured, and socially constructed manner. It further assumes that we can gain these insights into social realities through both verbal as well as non-verbal communication. The objective is to gain an understanding, not to make generalizations about the population at large, as in the case with quantitative research. So, when we talk about sample sizes in qualitative research are much smaller than in their quantitative counterparts, and we will deliberately select those people who will relinquish the most information on the topic at hand as we attempt to gain a deeper understanding from the perspective of the social actor. So the focus is then on gaining thick, rich, in-depth descriptions. In general, and because we most often use face-to-face and focus group interviews, we will record the interaction or the interview through the use of a dictaphone or a video camera. We need to start preparing for the analysis. This often means that verbal recordings will be written down word for word, or otherwise known as transcribing, with special emphasis on pauses, breaks, intonation, and then also hints at particular non-verbal cues. These inflections in speech are captured through the use of particular standardized transcription symbols or rules, so the reader too can see the possible meaning behind the actor's speech and to ensure that no meaning is misconstrued or lost. Now, because of the socially embedded nature of interactions, it's important that the researcher keeps what are known as memos, or as I call them, memos, as they are conducting their interviews. These memos will contribute to a greater and deeper understanding and contribute at large to the whole process of analysis. In addition, memoing is useful for recording reflective notes about what you are learning from your data and keeping track of any ideas and insights that you may have that will contribute to the analysis at a later stage. So once you have transcribed, generally what will follow is the segmenting and coding of your data. Segmenting basically involves dividing the data into meaningful analytic units. Coding, on the other hand, is the means by which the qualitative researcher organizes his or her data into categories, and these categories are represented by codes. It's basically the process of marking segments of data with symbols, descriptive words, or category names. And it basically helps the researcher to make sense and discover concepts within the data. Generally speaking, there are three different types of coding. First of all, we have setting or context codes. These codes relate to describing the setting and the context under which the phenomenon is described. Perception codes relate to the subject's perception or understanding about that particular phenomena. And then we have process codes, and these basically describe the factors that lead to change when you locate meaningful segments and you basically code them. It's advisable to keep a master list of all the codes that you have developed and used in your study. These codes are then reapplied to new segments of data as you work through the transcripts, and then after you have completed coding the data, you will start with interpretation. Now, interpretation involves identifying the core meaning of the data, and it requires that you remain faithful to the perspectives of the study participants within the wider social and theoretical relevance. It basically involves searching for the core meanings of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are described, and it explains how the study questions are answered and what findings mean beyond the context of your study. As previously mentioned, the purposes of your study will inform the type of analytic technique that you will use. Much like you choose statistical tests based on what output you need to answer your research questions, there are several types of qualitative analytic techniques available to the qualitative researcher. I'm going to cover a few here, just very briefly. Okay, so first up is grounded theory. This has been one of the widest used techniques for qualitative researchers. Well, what can I say? Grounded theory is exactly that. It's derived from the ground up. It focuses primarily on the narrative, what was said, and the outcome of this type of analysis is usually to develop theory using examples from the data. Generally, the analysis unfolds as we develop concepts through reduction by selective sampling of subjects and developing core concepts. That's just a bunch of jargon that means to say that grounded theory focuses on generating theoretical ideas or hypotheses from data to discover social and psychological processes in a very inductive manner. This again clearly demonstrates the role of existing theory in qualitative research, which is a highly minimized role. The key focus here is to read the text and apply the codes. In addition, it's grounded as we find evidence for our theory from and embedded within the data. So it's grounded within the data. So second, we have the phenomenological method of analysis. This type of analysis aims to provide descriptions, understanding, and meaning from the subject's point of view and provides a descriptive account of their lived experience. The researcher identifies themes and provides a structural explanation of findings across numerous people, and this is usually more than 5 people. It looks at shared experiences and the different accounts of these shared experiences across different subjects, and thereby provides a good sense of the lived experience of this phenomenon as a whole. In addition, it attempts to understand what an experience is and how they experience the same phenomenon. Even though there may be differences in accounts, you can extract shared experiences across these various accounts and provide a general account of that particular phenomenon. By doing this, we attempt to get to the essence of that experience. What needs to be reported is an account of what was experienced, how the individuals experienced it. Usually the steps involved in conducting this type of analysis involves locating people who are knowledgeable on a particular subject area and allowing them to describe their experiences regarding this shared phenomenon to gain a sense of wholeness and examine experiences beyond human awareness and that which can't be communicated. Our third type of analysis is probably the most commonly used method today, and this is known as thematic analysis. Themes are defined as units derived from patterns such as conversation topics, vocabulary, recurring activities, meanings, feelings, folk sayings, proverbs, and so forth, such that they bring together components or fragments of ideas and experiences which often are meaningless when they are viewed alone. Generally, we analyze the data and look for themes that link and exist across it. The steps of the analysis usually involve collecting and transcribing the data, usually in the form of audio tapes or videotapes, identifying patterns of experience, and all the data relating to these identified patterns. This is followed by combining related patterns into sub-themes. So we go through what your participants have responded and try to understand the meaning they are attempting to relay. From this understanding, we develop broad themes. We then assign codes to the main themes and integrate themes and responses into text of our own to support what we are saying in our dissertation or in our reports. So you're left with responses falling under particular themes, and we integrate them into our report. To do this, you could either discuss the main themes emerging from your study, providing verbatim responses to support your identified themes. Fourth, and probably the hardest method of analysis, is discourse analysis. Discourse is basically a term for all forms of communication, arguing that communication shapes the world around us, and when we communicate, we draw from a set of assumptions, norms, and generally accepted knowledge. We use this knowledge to make statements that make sense to others. These statements either reinforce existing knowledge or challenges it. Discourse is therefore commonly accepted knowledge and includes visual elements. There is a link between knowledge and power, thereby highlighting the importance of language by making explicit the social and the political context of how language is deployed. As such, it encourages a more politicized view of language and serves as a tool for revealing power and showing people's agency. Here attention is paid to active and passive voice, ambiguity, tone of language that is used to target particular audiences, clustering terminologies that occur to convey particular tones or messages, describing political, social, cultural, historical context, and generally to activities designed to convey meaning. In short, basically we are looking at why people say what they are saying. In other words, how people are using language to say something rather than what they are saying itself, and what worldview the actor is communicating from. Right, then we come to the method that most closely resembles a quantitative method. This method is known as content analysis. It's a method to make sense systematically to analyze large amounts of content from documents. Examples include newspapers, books, websites, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. Generally, this type of data is considered to be objective, as you're not really relying on people's memory and recall of events, but rather what's actually occurred and what's actually being recorded. So basically, it's a systematic way of collecting either qualitative or quantitative data and analyzing it qualitatively. It's a research method that detects, records, and analyzes the presence of specified words or concepts in a sample form of communication. Inferences can then be made about the messages within those texts. The coding process usually involves coding the text, example by word or by theme, and it's important to note here that codes can be explicit or implicit, in other words, implied meanings, and these codes should also be exhaustive. All aspects of concern have been identified. It needs to be exclusive in that we avoid an overlap of codes, and it needs to be enlightening, right? It needs to be interesting or coherent. So basically, you're going through the text and you identify categories or codes. You then assign numbers to these codes and analyze these numbers statistically. Now, regardless of what analytic technique you choose to use, when you present your findings, you need to do this in a convincing manner. You need to convince your reader that you have captured the meaning of your respondents. Much like statistics provide evidence for our findings, in qualitative research, most often people's words, their implied meaning, their explicit meanings, provide evidence for what it is that you as the researcher are presenting as your findings. You need to present and discuss the emergent coding systems, respondent meanings, and so forth to your reader in such a manner that they can easily understand and digest what you are saying. In other words, you need to present what they say, you need to discuss what they have said, and you need to use their words, their non-verbal behaviors, their utterances as evidence to back up your claims and build a convincing argument. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the data analysis section. I hope you have found this particularly useful. Thank you.